There's a moment when a woman looks at herself in the mirror and doesn't recognize who she's become. Not because her face has changed, but because her eyes no longer carry the same fire. The sparkle has dimmed, the light has softened into something quieter, something tired. It's the quiet that comes after years of saying yes when she wanted to say no. The quiet of swallowing her needs just to keep the peace. The quiet of pretending she's fine, just so he wouldn't leave. Louise Hay once said that every time we betray our truth to please someone else, we whisper to our soul that her needs don't matter, and the soul listens. At first, she whispers back with restlessness, with a longing, with a sense that something isn't quite right. But if the betrayal continues, her voice fades, not because she gives up, but because she's waiting for you to return. The need to please, especially when it comes to a man, is rarely about generosity. It's about fear. Fear of abandonment. Fear of not being enough. Fear that if you ever disappoint him, if you ever say what you really feel, he'll disappear. And that fear isn't born in adulthood. It often comes from much earlier, from the moments when love felt conditional, when affection had to be earned, when silence was safer than asking for more. Brené Brown says that people-pleasing isn't kindness. It's fear in disguise. It's a survival strategy rooted in shame. Shame that tells you, if you don't make him happy, you'll be alone. Shame that whispers, be small, be quiet, don't need too much. But what happens when that fear no longer fits? What happens when the soul, weary and unheard, begins to rise? This episode isn't about blaming. It's about waking up. Waking up to the subtle ways you've learned to perform love instead of receiving it. Waking up to the difference between being needed and being cherished. Waking up to your own voice, buried under years of emotional shape-shifting. Because pleasing doesn't make you more lovable, it makes you invisible. And the moment you stop trying to be who he wants is the moment you start remembering who you are. And now, let's explore the hidden sorrow behind this urge to please, the wound that whispers, love me, even if I disappear in the process. Pleasing isn't kindness. It's a quiet kind of disappearance. It starts subtly. You say yes to things that don't feel right. You laugh at jokes that sting. You minimize your needs so he doesn't feel uncomfortable. At first, it looks like love, like compromise, like care. But slowly, you start noticing the ache of being everything for someone who doesn't see you fully. And the truth is, it doesn't feel generous anymore. It feels like loss, a loss of self. Many women were taught that love is something you earn, that affection comes to those who are soft, accommodating, agreeable. You may have heard it in childhood, the praise that came when you didn't make a fuss, the approval you got when you swallowed your tears, the way people stayed close when you made their lives easier. So you became good at it. You learned how to shrink, how to soothe everyone else's discomfort, how to be lovable in ways that made you invisible to yourself. But the soul doesn't forget who she is. She watches, she waits, and eventually she starts to grieve. Not for him, but for you. Because here's what no one tells you. When you abandon yourself to be loved, the love you receive can never fill you. It was never meant to, because it wasn't given to the real you. It was given to the version you performed. And when that pain becomes too loud to ignore, when you find yourself lying awake at night wondering where you went, that's the beginning. That's the sacred unraveling of the woman who has pleased for too long. The prison of pleasing isn't made of his expectations. It's made of the belief that you must betray your truth to be chosen. And the key to freedom isn't in changing him. It's in returning to yourself. Let's walk a little deeper now, into that invisible wound that whispers, I'm only lovable if, and uncover where that story truly began. There's a silent phrase many women carry deep inside, often without realizing it. I'm only lovable if I stay quiet, if I don't ask for too much, if I give him everything, if I make myself easy to love. This belief isn't something you were born with. It was given to you, shaped in moments too early to remember, but too deep to forget. Maybe it was the way a parent pulled away when you cried too much. Maybe it was the way your needs were labeled too dramatic, too needy, too much. So you adapted. You learned to read the room before you spoke. You became careful with your feelings, cautious with your needs. You started to believe that love is something you had to earn by being less of yourself. And now, in your adult relationships, that belief still lingers. It whispers every time you hesitate to speak your truth. It tightens your chest when you feel joy but immediately fear it will be taken away. It colors the way you love, always giving more, always waiting, always afraid that if you stop pleasing, you'll be left behind. But what if the wound wasn't about him at all? What if the real question is, who taught you to doubt your worth? Healing begins when you dare to go back to that place. Not to stay there, but to understand. To see how early neglect, emotional absence, or inconsistency taught your nervous system to equate love with effort, silence, or perfection. Louise Hay reminds us, you have been criticizing yourself for years, and it hasn't worked. Try approving of yourself and see what happens. Because self-worth isn't about becoming better. It's about remembering you were never broken to begin with. This wound doesn't define you, but it does explain the choices that hurt. And when you see it, name it, and hold it with compassion, that's when it begins to lose its grip. Let's follow the thread a little further, into the soul's exhaustion. Because there's a kind of tiredness that doesn't come from the body, but from abandoning yourself one too many times. There's a fatigue that no amount of sleep can fix. A heaviness that doesn't live in your muscles, but in your spirit. It's the exhaustion of showing up again and again for someone who barely sees you, the weariness of trying to be enough for someone who doesn't know how to receive you. And when you feel it, you don't just feel tired, you feel emptied. Drained of your joy, your clarity, your softness. You catch yourself going through the motions, but your heart isn't in it anymore. Not because you don't care, but because you've cared so much for so long, and gotten so little in return. That kind of tiredness is sacred. It's not weakness. It's not failure. It's a signal. It's your soul speaking in the only language she has left. Silence, tension, burnout. She's asking, gently but firmly, when will you choose me instead? Louise Hay would look at this moment not as a breakdown, but as a breakthrough. She would say, you've spent enough time rejecting yourself for the sake of others. It's time to come home. And home isn't a place. It's the moment you stop asking someone else for permission to matter. This soul tiredness is an invitation to pause, to notice, to stop running on the fumes of unreciprocated effort. Because your energy is sacred, your time is sacred, your love is sacred, and none of it was meant to be poured endlessly into a cup with holes at the bottom. When you listen to that exhaustion with compassion, not judgment, something shifts. You stop blaming yourself for being too sensitive. You stop pretending that crumbs are a feast, and in that space, your true self, the one who's been waiting, begins to stir. Let's keep walking, gently, into the deeper layers of this, because sometimes what you've called love was actually performance. And the truth about real love is far simpler and far kinder than what you've been taught to accept. Real love doesn't ask you to twist yourself into a shape that no longer feels like home. It doesn't require you to perform, to impress, to prove. It simply receives you, as you are, not as you pretend to be. But for many women, love has been confused with approval, with reward, with a kind of quiet obedience. You may have found yourself measuring your worth by how much you could tolerate, by how often you could stay silent, by how little space you took up in his world. And yet, the kind of love that makes you shrink isn't love. It's fear disguised as affection. It's validation dressed up in romance. And while it may feel intoxicating at first, it slowly starts to erode the parts of you that were once full of color and fire. True love, the kind your soul remembers, doesn't flinch at your fullness. It doesn't punish your emotions or weaponize your honesty. It holds space for your complexity, your tenderness, your power. It welcomes your no as much as your yes. It doesn't need you to be perfect. It just needs you to be real. And that truth is both liberating and terrifying. Because if love isn't about performance, then what have you been working so hard to earn? There comes a moment when you start to notice the difference between love and appeasement, between connection and compliance, between being chosen and being used. And in that moment, something inside you rises. A quiet rebellion, a remembering that you were never meant to be a character in someone else's story. You were meant to write your own. Now let's look at how this performance, this constant pleasing, begins to eat away at your sense of self. Because emotional people-pleasing isn't just tiring. It becomes a form of self-sabotage. And the price is far greater than you may have imagined. You begin by trying to be what he needs. You shape yourself around his moods, his preferences, his wounds. You become the peacemaker, the nurturer, the understanding one. The one who never asks for too much. The one who always stays calm, even when she's breaking inside. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you start to forget who you are. That's the silent cost of emotional people-pleasing. You don't just lose boundaries, you lose your reflection. You wake up one day and realize you've become a version of yourself you barely recognize. Always smiling, always giving, always shrinking. And yet, somehow, always feeling not enough. This is how self-sabotage hides in plain sight, because the more you please, the more disconnected you become from your own truth. And when you're disconnected from your truth, anxiety moves in. That quiet hum of fear. What if he only loves me because I'm useful? What if the moment I stop pleasing, he walks away? That question is terrifying, but it's also revealing, because if someone only stays because of what you give, not who you are, then what you have isn't love. It's a transaction. And you are worth so much more than that. Louise Hay taught that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself. When you betray your needs to keep someone else happy, you are abandoning the very foundation of your peace. This kind of sabotage doesn't come from weakness. It comes from survival, from having learned, long ago, that safety means being agreeable, that love means being needed, that worth means being useful. But you are not here to be useful. You are here to be whole. So when the fear rises, when the urge to please returns, pause. Breathe. And remember, you are not the mask you wear to be loved. You are the soul beneath it, radiant, worthy, and already enough. Now let's explore the moment everything begins to change. The sacred threshold where a woman says no, without guilt, where she begins to reclaim her voice, her rhythm, her right to exist on her own terms. There's a moment, quiet, trembling, and often lonely, when a woman says no, and means it, not to punish, not to rebel, but to return to herself. That first no feels like betrayal. Not of him, but of the story you've lived for so long. The story that said your worth was tied to how agreeable, how flexible, how accommodating you could be. Saying no shatters that illusion. And with that shattering comes fear. And freedom. Because when you say no without apology, you're not closing the door to love. You're opening the door to self-respect. You're rewriting the terms of connection, not from desperation, but from dignity. At first it feels foreign, maybe even selfish. You might second-guess yourself. You might wonder if you're being too harsh. But slowly, something shifts. That shaky no becomes a clear boundary. That hesitation becomes grounded truth, and the guilt, it starts to fade, replaced by something stronger, clarity. Louise Hay spoke often about the power of self-approval. She would say, "I now choose to believe that I am deserving of love just as I am, not when you agree, not when you perform, but now, here, as you are." Every no spoken from self-love is a quiet revolution. It teaches the world how to treat you, but more importantly, it teaches you how to treat yourself. With reverence, with tenderness, with a kind of sacred firmness that says, I matter too. And something powerful happens in your relationships when this shift occurs. Because when you stop trying to please, the dynamic changes. And whether he respects your truth or walks away from it, what remains is your own alignment. Let's explore now what happens on the other side of that no, how he reacts, and more importantly, what that reaction reveals about the love you've been receiving. Sometimes, when you stop pleasing, he pauses. He looks at you differently, not because you've become someone else, but because for the first time you've stopped being who he expected. You've shifted the dance. You've stepped out of the pattern, and that shift is powerful. For some, this change invites respect. He begins to notice the strength he never had to earn, the clarity you bring when you no longer twist yourself into shapes that please him. And for the first time, he sees you, not as the woman who makes his life easier, but as the woman who honors her own. But for others, he withdraws, not because you've done something wrong, but because your presence was convenient, not cherished. Your willingness to bend was what kept him comfortable, and without that, he may not know how to stay. His silence, his retreat, his discomfort, they are not about your worth. They are about his limits, and this is the gift of truth. It doesn't always keep people close, but it always brings clarity. You finally see who values your essence and who only valued your effort. It's not easy. There may be grief, there may be longing, but there will also be peace. Because there is something deeply liberating about no longer managing someone else's comfort at the expense of your own truth. Louise Hay believed that what we affirm about ourselves becomes our reality. When you begin to affirm your right to be seen, to be heard, to be whole, the people who cannot honor that truth begin to fade from your life. And while that may hurt, it is never a loss. It is alignment. So whether he changes or disappears, what matters most is that you stayed. You stayed with yourself. You chose your voice over his comfort. And that, dear soul, is the beginning of real love, the kind that starts within. Now let us go deeper still, into the sacred space where this transformation becomes visible, not to him, but to you. A moment before the mirror, a quiet vow to never abandon yourself again. Stand in front of the mirror, not to fix anything, not to check how you look, but to remember who you are. Look into your own eyes, the ones that have seen so much, endured so much, forgiven so much. Let yourself be seen, not by him, not by the world, but by the one who matters most now, you. And if the tears come, let them come. Because those tears are not weakness. They are sacred. They are the water of remembering, the soft unraveling of years spent chasing someone else's love while abandoning your own. In that quiet space, say the words that Louise Hay encouraged countless women to speak. I am no longer here to perform for love. I am here to be loved for who I am. Say it softly. Say it firmly. Say it as many times as you need, until something inside you nods in agreement. This is more than a sentence. It's a vow, a reawakening, a meeting between the woman you've been and the woman you are becoming. Mirror work, as Louise called it, is not about affirmation alone. It's about intimacy. It's about facing yourself without masks, without roles, without shame. It's about making eye contact with your soul and saying, I'm here now. I won't leave you again. In that moment, you may feel a quiet strength rising. Not loud, not dramatic, but deep, unshakable. The kind that says, even if no one else chooses me today, I choose me. And that choice is a turning point, a seed planted in sacred soil, a declaration to yourself, by yourself, for yourself. Now let me tell you a story, a real one that may sound a lot like yours, about a woman who spent years silencing her truth until the day she finally spoke. She was the woman who never asked for much, the one who understood too quickly, who apologized first, who smiled even when her heart ached. For years she shaped herself around the needs of others, especially his. She didn't call it people-pleasing. She called it love. She called it patience. She called it being the easy one. But beneath the quiet surface, something was breaking. It wasn't one big moment. It was 1,000 small ones, 1,000 silences she swallowed, 1,000 nights she waited for a tenderness that never came, 1,000 times she chose peace over truth, until her peace became a prison. And then, one day, her voice rose, shaky, unfamiliar, but undeniable. She said, I can't keep doing this. Not with blame, not with anger, just a truth that had waited too long. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He just left. But here's the part no one talks about. She didn't collapse. She didn't fall apart. She grieved. Yes, she cried. She unraveled. But beneath the unraveling, something else emerged. Herself. The woman who had been buried under the weight of pleasing. The woman who had forgotten her own voice. The woman who, for the first time, felt the strength of standing in her truth, even if it meant standing alone. And in that sacred solitude, she found something more powerful than his approval. She found her own. Louise Hay would have called it a return to self, a healing not of the past, but of the relationship she now held with the present version of herself. Because sometimes, what feels like the end is just the beginning of finally coming home. And as we reach the closing steps of this journey, let's talk about what it truly means to become the woman who no longer begs to be seen. There comes a day when you no longer reach for your phone, hoping for his message. When you no longer rehearse words in your mind, trying to make your truth more digestible. When you no longer bend yourself into softness, just to be tolerable. That day doesn't come all at once. It arrives in waves, quiet, subtle, almost invisible at first. But it comes. It comes when you realize that being seen is not something you beg for. It's something you embody. It comes when you remember that your worth is not up for negotiation, not even for the kind of love you once prayed for. Louise Hay said, "The only thing you ever have any control over is your current thought. And today, your thought might be this: I matter, even when I say no, even when I walk away, even when no one claps for my healing." Becoming the woman who doesn't beg to be seen is not about arrogance. It's not about closing your heart. It's about choosing your dignity over desperation, your alignment over approval, your presence over performance. Brené Brown reminds us that vulnerability is not weakness. It's the purest form of courage. And there is nothing more vulnerable, more courageous, than a woman who says, "I will no longer betray myself to be loved." And when that moment arrives, when you stop performing, stop pleasing, stop contorting, you meet her, the woman you were always meant to be. She is softer, not because she bends, but because she no longer breaks. She is quieter, not because she silences herself, but because she is at peace. She is radiant, not because someone else sees her, but because she finally sees herself. And she is here, waiting for you. If this message stirred something in your heart, I invite you to subscribe, to share this space with other women ready to return to themselves. And before you go, there's a video waiting for you on the screen, one that continues this journey of emotional clarity and sacred self-worth. Click it. Let the healing continue.